to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, March 27th, hump day, middle of the week, starting that long, slow glide down to Pow on a Friday. It's kind of a rocky roller coaster ride these days, just watching all the stuff going on. If you were not in the audience for Republic Broadcasting and totally dependent on the wires and lights in a box called the TV news, you would think everything is just all hunky-dory with the world. I was just watching over here on CNN, big story about how NFL football players are taking acting lessons, so after they're no longer football players, they can look forward to a career in Hollywood. Huzzah, huzzah. Well, good for them. Again, it doesn't affect our life. They're going on and on about gay marriage in the Supreme Court, and everybody's going back and forth. And, of course, you know my feeling about gay marriage. If you're opposed to gay marriage, don't marry a gay. Problem solved. End of story. Going on about Amanda Knox and whether she's going to be retried for whatever it is she's supposed to have done, yada, 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 yada. Apparently, General Petraeus has apologized for having had an affair that was used to drive him out of his career. And again, doesn't affect my life, because he wasn't having an affair with my wife. And, you know, let's face it, the reality is, if playing around on your spouse was grounds for disqualification, the entire city of Washington, D.C. would be a ghost town. It's all politics here. The one thing the media is going on about that is very serious, of course, is the saber rattling with North Korea. The U.S. has been provoking North Korea, and North Korea's out there with its bluster and bluff, and it's all being spun that somehow North Korea is the problem. North Korea was kind of minding its own business. Then the U.S. hit it with sanctions. Then they had these B-52 overflights. Then they had this huge naval exercise with Japan and South Korea off the coast of North Korea, which is guaranteed to provoke a nation. Roosevelt used it to, as part of that 8-step plan to goad Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor. I'm talking about that a little bit further on in the show, but I want to lead off right now. Over the last couple of days, this whole thing with the claims that Syrian President Assad had been killed by an Iranian bodyguard has been sort of flipping back and forth, and apparently a photo has been circulating on the internet supposedly showing his dead, bullet-riddled body on the ground, and of course it is another fake. You would think after that embarrassment over the dead Osama photos that whoever's behind these fakes would have learned a lesson, but no. If at first you don't succeed, lie again. And this photo was sent to me by a whole bunch of people saying, see, he's really dead, he's really dead. And it took me about 15 seconds to realize it was another fake. And I have the original that was sent to me posted to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and underneath it, the source image from which the fake was made. And again, when I was still working in visual effects, I was very, very good at it. So they've busted for another one of these absolutely silly hoaxes and lies, and if they're resorting to fakery, then the whole story was fake. And I don't know where Assad is. He's probably got his hands full. He may actually be avoiding going out in public because he knows people are trying to kill him here. Now, the real thing, the real story, of course, continues to be the economy in Europe. And again, this is something that is absolutely not being touched on by the TV news. Not even a mention, and it's starting to get really serious over there. We're going to come up on a break for commercials. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And when we come back, we're going to get into this European situation. This is, in my opinion, should be the top story in the American corporate media. And the American corporate media doesn't want you to know. They want you to be happy and think about NFL players taking acting lessons. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on over in Europe, and you need to be paying attention to this. This does have the potential to directly affect your life. Certainly far more than NFL players training to be actors when their football careers end here. I had a friend who actually worked on the movie that Muhammad Ali tried to do when he'd retired from boxing, and the running joke on the set was, who told him he could act? Really? Who's going to tell him he can't? Ha 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 ha. And the film basically didn't do too well. Now, getting back to the economy. We're seeing all these reports from places, well, like BBC is reporting Cyprus making a superhuman effort to reopen the banks by Thursday. They keep delaying it. We're hearing they're going to have all kinds of security, including regular police and possibly the military, to keep things quiet at the bank. They're talking about serious, strict capital controls to prevent runs on the bank, which is, of course, what is uppermost in everybody's mind in Cyprus. Get your money out before there's a repeat of this haircut that they're already talking about. Analysts all over Europe are saying what they did in Cyprus isn't going to keep Cyprus from default. It's a delaying tactic. They're going to have to come back and do it again. And what's really kind of amazing is Panikos Demetriadis has said, we have to restore the public's trust in banks. Good luck on that one. Trust in the banks is absolutely gone. And it's not just Cyprus, it's all over Europe. The contagion is spreading. Ben Bernanke's out there saying, oh, the contagion won't spread here, the contagion won't jump the Atlantic, and all the rest of that stuff. Do you remember back when the mortgage-backed security fraud imploded? Bernanke was saying the same thing. Oh, the contagion won't spread to Europe. And, of course, it immediately did. Because Wall Street had been selling these fraudulent mortgage-backed security bundles to Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse and Bank of England, Bank of Libya. And they all wanted their money back, and that's what precipitated this crash. The U.S. couldn't refund all that money immediately. They couldn't buy back all the toxic assets right then and there. And that's what started the European banks failing here. Ex-Republic TV is reporting the Eurozone chief is suggesting more raids on bank accounts could come. And it's probably going to start accelerating almost immediately because over in Spain, let's see, one of their largest banks, Bankia, and a small one, Catalunya, just went bankrupt. They were nationalized by Spain 18 months ago. Now they're having to be taken over by the government lending agency FROB, F-R-O-B. So we're already seeing this contagion spread. And even yesterday they were talking about raiding the depositors' accounts to prop up the banking system. And if you notice this common theme, we must protect our single currency. Well, no sacrifice is too great to protect this piece of ink and paper. And that's all it really is. The European Union, when it was formed, it had a built-in self-destruct mechanism called the European Central Bank. Yet another private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And that is what doomed the Eurozone. And now that it's hovering at the edge of collapse, they turn around and they start robbing the people. They start robbing the people. And because of those derivatives from Wall Street, it has to come here. Now, I got a lot of emails, I presume from people who are very friendly with the Federal Reserve and who, like the corporate media, don't want Americans thinking about what's going on here. And they're saying, confiscation can't happen here. Because if the banks get into trouble, they'll just do more quantitative easing. No, they won't. Because they've done so much quantitative easing, it has seriously degraded the value of the money that you have in your pocket. But more important to the money junkies, it's degrading the value of the money they have in their pockets. Printing up more money to save the banks harms their wealth, their riches. They're not as rich as they were yesterday. They can't have that. That runaway printing is not only destroying the value of your dollars, but those of the money junkies. So from their point of view, and they are in charge of our banking system, it makes much more sense to simply directly confiscate your money out of your bank account, because that leaves the value of the money they have intact. It's wealth preservation by looting the people. And that's why it is going to happen here. They can't just print away the debt. That harms the 1%ers. And they will not allow that to happen. There are polls taking place in Europe. This was reported on CNBC, where the majority of Europeans are saying that the Cyprus confiscation, it won't be the last. It won't be the last at all. And we have the Dutch financial minister. He's trying to backpedal from what he was saying before about the Cyprus template for all of Europe. And now he's saying that a levy on wealth is defendable in principle. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. What would be defendable in principle is if some guy who's out of work, he steals a loaf of bread to feed his children. It may be illegal, but we can defend that. He's got hungry kids. When you have these bankers who are millionaires and billionaires robbing your bank accounts, that's not defendable in principle. It isn't. Now, Dijsselbloem is now backing off and saying that his comment about the template was taken out of context. He's backing off on that, and yet now we are seeing a report, and this came out of Investment Watch blog, that the European Parliament is already discussing a Europe-wide confiscation of bank accounts above 100,000 euros. That's above their insurance level. They can't confiscate anything from accounts less than 100,000 euros because then they have to turn around and put the money back through the depositor's insurance program. We actually have something similar here in the United States of America. Your FDIC is cut off at $100,000. So they're already talking about it as being Europe-wide. And again, they're basically saying savings accounts in Spain, Italy, and European countries will be raided if need be. Of course, they're going to need be. There's no 11th marble. They won't accept that. We're seeing all these articles all over the place where they say, oh, it's the entitlements, it's runaway government spending on those needy, hungry people. We shouldn't be spending any money on them. We can't get a profit return from them. Spain's unemployment has now hit 5 million. 1/4 of their population is unemployed, highest level since 1975. French unemployment is approaching its 1997 record high. The British banks have been ordered to stockpile an extra £25 billion in anticipation of yet another financial crisis. We're starting to see headlines saying Europe's going to go into a full-blown depression. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Keith in Tennessee. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I'm on your website, and I'm a subscriber for the last 2 years, but I'm trying to figure out how to renew my subscription.
Okay, how you do that very simply is you send me a private email, because I hired this expert to do some work on my website, and it cost me a lot of money to do it, and he broke it. Almost completely destroyed it, and I got it back up and running. But there are some things that still won't work, like the story voting mechanism corrupts the database, and the membership system is broken. I'm doing it manually, so send me a private email, and I'll get you hooked up again. Okay?
What's your email address?
WRH@whatreallyhappened.com.
Okay, Mike, and I got to tell you that you're doing exemplary work out there. Fantastic work, and I would suggest that anyone listening become a subscriber here to What Really Happened, and they'll have an opportunity to post stories that they think are relevant. I think you're the only one out there that's actually doing that, Mike, and I love you, and I love the work that you do, and thanks for that. WRH@whatreallyhappened.com, right?
That's correct. And there's a little button up at the very top of the page that says email WRH. If you click that, your mail client will come up with an email already correctly addressed. Okay?
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. Thanks for the call,
Bye.
Keith. Now, getting back to what I was talking about, where we're seeing all these articles start to come out in the corporate-owned media, trying to put the blame for all of this financial disaster onto entitlements and those malingerers who claim they're disabled or they've been disabled in wars and now they want somebody to take. Those selfish, greedy, unproductive, useless eaters, it's all their fault. No, it isn't. And again, this was an article that came out of Investment Watch blog, and the headline was, "The ECB's balance sheet is literally a work of fiction." And it is, just like the balance sheets everywhere else. They're rigging the LIBOR, rigging the gold, rigging the unemployment numbers. It's all lies, fraud, and deception right now. But further into the article, the author is going on about it's these costly entitlements that are really causing the problem. No, it isn't. It's that whole 11th marble thing. It's that Ponzi scheme. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking over here at the CNN feed, and the fluff mode is on there. They got a story about how the Kennedy Library has released a new batch of photos from the childhood of Teddy and Robert. And it's all interesting for historians, but again, they're just grasping at straws for distractions. Just before we went to air here, they were talking about how the new Honda has a built-in vacuum cleaner. Isn't that cool? Well, Honda makes cool cars. I very much like our little 12-year-old Honda that we're driving around there since we got rid of that made-in-Tennessee Xterra. But again, they're trying to find anything to make it look like they're reporting on the news while not reporting on the news. They do not want you thinking about maybe going down to your bank and pulling some of that money out of that savings account just in case, put into silver and gold. Anyway, getting back to this story about the ECB's balance sheet is literally a work of fiction. It's a piece of propaganda. Oh, it's all the fault of those hungry and homeless and those malingerers, people too lazy to make a living. They just don't want to work here. Well, let me make a connection to what just happened in Cyprus. Because when you go out and you rob the accounts of people who worked hard to build themselves a little bit of wealth. I'm not talking about the 1% money junkies who just game the system, but your middle class who go out and they take the risks, they start a business, they provide jobs, they make products, and they build up a little bit of wealth, and you steal that from them. What kind of a lesson does that send to the next generation? These young kids are going to be walking around and saying, why should I bother? Why should I bother going through the headache of trying to start a business, of going through all that insane regulatory compliance where, you know, if I fail, I fail, and if I succeed, the bankers are going to take the money anyway? We're disincentivizing work when you do that. You're taking money away from the people who would normally be going to those shopping malls to buy the products. This is one of the most foolish policies possible. It is destructive. And basically what they're trying to do in Europe, same thing they tried to do here in the United States of America, they're trying to pick the economy up by the very top, by the banks. And if you look at the structure of an economy throughout an entire nation, you realize that it's a good model for this, how do you move it, is moving a house. We've all seen on TV or sometimes in real life, if you want to move a house or a building, you have to pick it up by that foundation and move it as a whole unit. If you just try and grab the ridge cap on the roof and lift it up, the whole thing's going to shatter. And that's exactly what's going on here. The foundation of any economy are the workers whose labor creates the real wealth of a nation, the products that are going to be sold, exported, the crops that are grown to feed the people. You have to pick the economy up by picking them up. This idea of transferring all the wealth up to Wall Street and Washington, D.C. is an attempt to pick up the entire national economy by its roof. And it is shattering right before our very eyes. And I know I keep hitting this point, and I'm going to go on hitting it because you need to share this with all of your friends. The real villain, the real cost for all of this are these private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, a system that by design creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. It's a pyramid scheme. It keeps on going only as long as they can get further, larger and larger pools of borrowers until everybody's in debt and the whole thing collapses. There has never been a private central banking scheme that didn't collapse at some point. There isn't a single nation enslaved to a private central bank issuing that public currency as a loan at interest that is not mired in this artificially created debt. It is a failed system from the point of view of the nation and its people. And what's worse is the con artists who set this all up knew it was going to collapse. But they set it up anyway because it brought themselves lives of wealth and luxury and privilege and power. And they knew it was going to fall apart, but it wasn't going to fall apart till they were dead in their graves after a lifetime of luxury and unearned wealth. They knew it was going to happen. Not our problem. We'll be dead by then. And that's why we're in this mess. A couple of weeks ago, I put out a challenge. You show me any nation with this system of banking that is not in serious debt trouble, that has actually got a healthy, vibrant economy, that is sustainable. Emphasis on that word. Because I got a couple of emails from people saying, well, the U.S. economy was doing great, with the Federal Reserve System back in the 70s and 80s. Well, we had the tech boom that was kind of powering that. And the reason it was doing well was more and more people were willing to take the risk of borrowing more money. But the fundamental flaw was still perpetuating. And here we are today. Apparently, back in 1987, we had 13,000 banks. We're down to 6,000. Holding on the books $7.4 trillion in deposits, but backed up by only $32 billion in actual cash reserves. That is a warning sign. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab some phone calls. Nick in Japan. Ohio gozaimasu. What's on your mind today?
Ohio gozaimasu. Thank you for noting that it is morning time here.
Yes.
Listen, I think you're making a sort of, kind of an egregious mistake, error in judgment. And I would hope that you'd give me just a second to point it out with a comment and then a question. I'm wondering if we're not making the same mistake. In a way, I think what you're doing is sort of the civil rights movement of its day, and probably more so because it's a global platform. But Mahatma Gandhi, as you know, MLK adopted a method of compliance from Mahatma Gandhi called Satyagraha. What a lot of people don't know is that this actually predated Mahatma Gandhi, and it encompassed one of 10 principles. One of the principles was nonviolence. The other one was a term called Swadeshi, which loosely translated means sole economy of a nation. And so what it basically did was sort of force compliance on the global populace in not purchasing certain products. And so this was something that was tried and true. They literally, through this method, they were able to destroy the British Empire. And Martin Luther King used it with some efficacy, targeting bus lines, certain products, but he was able to bring certain states to their knees. So I'm just wondering if we're sort of deluding ourselves in not really understanding just how important it is for us to not only take our money out of Rothschild-owned banks, but to not purchase Rothschild products, Coca-Cola, J.P. Morgan. Most of these products, whether they be luxury, at that time, Swadeshi, many of the people thought, they argued for ubiquity. They were like, well, the products are from Britain, they're absolutely everywhere. How can we target these economies? How can we target the economy of Britain? They're huge. And so we're making much of the same argument today. So what I'm suggesting is that, I guess my question is this. With what you do on an everyday basis, the commitment, the dedication you put in on an everyday basis, is it you're placing the onus of the burden on money junkies and almost none at all on the society at large?
Well, I'm putting the blame on the money junkies.
I know, but I completely understand that. My only point is, look, you ask of the people a certain commitment. You put in your hard work, You've been doing it for 17-something years or more. Is it kind of, if you do not ask the populace, especially when this collapse happens, I mean, are we doomed to repeat this same thing over again? Because if you don't ask the people to say, look, if you sort of give them a carte blanche, a sort of a check that says, look, you don't have any responsibility in the product.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not sure where you're getting that. What I have been telling my listeners is we need to avoid violence, because that is exactly what the government and the money junkies are hoping is going to happen, because they're prepared to respond to that. And if the conflict goes into violence, that basically cuts off all further discussion of the root causes of the crisis. They're desperate.
Well, I've been listening to you for 2 years.
Okay,
I've heard you use the term money.
Please hang on a second. Let me finish. Okay. Right now, the corporate media and the government are desperate to distract people away from that private central banking as being the cause of all of our suffering. The corporate media, they're out there with, they will not touch that. That is the big, deep, dark secret they don't want you to think about. And if we resort to violent measures, then all discussion gets cut off. It becomes a violent confrontation between both sides. The core causes of it all are left ignored and hidden, and that guarantees the cycle will start again once the violence is all over. As far as asking people to be very choosy in their buying habits, we do talk about that a lot. We have Karen Tostado on our show. I'm on her show talking about the desirability of national strikes, which Gandhi used to such effect in India. So I'm not saying that the people shouldn't be trying to take care of themselves, but the people are on the defensive. The people are the victims, and the villains are these private central bank Ponzi schemes that are the common enemy of all humanity. But we do a lot of consumer reporting on my website and here on the show, and tell people to stay away from products that are harmful to them. I don't know if you watched The Daily Show last night, but he had the author on of this book that basically lays out how the large food corporations are designing their food to give you what they call the bliss moment. They're literally engineering the food to trigger signals in the brain that you are happy and satisfied because you will buy more of what they're selling, even though the scientists who create these foods don't eat their own product. Same with Monsanto and their GMO corn. So the idea, the consumers are literally being drugged to eat more food with MSG and Monsanto aspartame. But more and more consumers are becoming aware, and that's why we're starting to see GMO-free labeling show up in various stores. We're starting to see labels that say no MSG inside. The consumers are beginning to change the marketplace. And so the consumers, ordinary citizens, need to take any and all actions to protect themselves against all of these corporate onslaughts, whether it's financial corporation or food corporation or medical corporation. In fact, somebody just sent me a story. Apparently, Cancer Treatment Centers of America is now under investigation for false advertising. Apparently, their actual survival rates aren't as high as claimed on the TV commercials. So as long as we keep people aware, they're going to make those good choices. But I don't blame the consumers for being seduced into these unhealthy foods and unhealthy products. They're the victims. It's like rape. I'm not going to blame the rape victim. This was done to them. They didn't do anything wrong. It was done to them. Okay.
I'm suggesting that we should. I'm merely saying that what we need to do is the people have some sense of responsibility in what they purchase. I mean, the last we talked, you had the Coca-Cola. I think you still got the can right behind you. I'm saying that we have a responsibility. We all have a social responsibility, and it seems like, when I hear you talk about the issue, I very rarely, and I love your show. I've been a fan since well before your website looked the way that it looks now. I mean, it's fantastic.
Ooh, you are an old guy.
A lot of my information. Oh, I'm an older. I'm a veteran. And so, I've got my own little website, accentsnews.com. I pull most of my information from yours, and I just more or less reprint just to get the information out there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I really admire what you do. I'm just merely saying that I think that we all have a sort of responsibility, and I think that's a message that was sort of lost in the civil rights movement, that we're sort of repeating the same era. And this is why we're in the situation that we're in. that we have failed to learn from the mistakes of the past.
On the contrary, I think we are learning from the mistakes of the past, because we've been through two of these banker-caused world wars, and the people bought hook, line, and sinker the officially sanctioned explanation for why we had to smash the German Empire twice, and this time people aren't buying into it. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, it took almost 30 years before half the population doubted the Warren Report. When we got into Iraq and Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, the majority of the public knew it was a lie before the war even ended, and that's an historic first. So I think because of the Internet and the alternative media, the fundamental flow of information in society has changed dramatically, and the corporations and political and financial people are late out of the gate trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, we are the wallet of last resort.
No, we're not anymore.
That's going to change.
Not anymore.
Really? No?
Well, that was the message of the Occupy movement, standing up and saying, we will not be the wallet of last resort. They're standing up and saying that in Cyprus. There's rioting going on over there. Again, not being reported in the American media. And I think that's a major reason for why the government is so desperate to come up with a justification to ban guns right now, because they understand when they start shaving off the accounts in the American banks, they're going to have a very angry American population on their hands, and right now 8 out of every 10 Americans owns a gun. And I would not be surprised if the government, because they're so well prepared to put down a violent revolution, and they can't deal with a peaceful revolution, they may stage something and say, oh, we've got Al-Qaeda in America, we've got to take away all the guns. They're desperate. They're getting some of the propaganda coming out is just absurd. I was going to mention this later in the show. MSNBC is out there saying that opposition to Bloomberg's gun grab in New York is just anti-Semitism. And when they start trying to do that linkage, you know how panicked and scared they're getting.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Have yourself a good day. And getting back to the news here. This is an interesting story, and this came out of Forbes. No less than Forbes is reporting that Alan Greenspan is saying, maybe it is time to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And it was time to get rid of the Federal Reserve 99 years ago. This late in the game, the damage has been done. The bankers have the real wealth of this country. They have most of the gold. So they might say, well, it's time to let the Federal Reserve go, rather than risk the American people charging the banks with tar feathers, pitchforks, and flaming torches. And because they are now in possession of most of the gold, they'll say, yes, let's go back to a gold standard, which will make us slaves to them and their economy again. This is why I'm opposed to a gold standard. I think gold is great for wealth preservation. Silver is great for wealth preservation. We need a value-based currency. But if we value that currency in a commodity that is owned by the bankers who created this mess, the evils will perpetuate. And speaking of evils and speaking of money junkie thinking, there's a story, this came out of Activist Post, where this bank foreclosed on a 75-year-old housebound woman, medical issues, bad eyesight, had surgery last year, can't get around. They foreclosed on her home, supposedly over $49 in unpaid property taxes, and it turned out the taxes were actually paid. There was a clerical error. See, if you are on a reverse mortgage, there's something that you need to be aware of. It's called the acceleration clause. That company that sold you the reverse mortgage and said you will live in your home and you will own it until the day you die. Not really. There's a clause called the acceleration clause, which can be invoked for a variety of reasons, including unpaid taxes. And because these banks and mortgage companies need the full value of your home on their balance sheet to stay solvent, that's what triggered off this fury of fraudulent foreclosures that the U.S. federal government refused to prosecute them from. So 75-year-old woman, she supposedly owes $49 in unpaid taxes on her house. Turns out she really didn't. The bank took her home away. Now, another telling indicator of where the economy in this country is going. This is a story that came out of PR Newswire. According to recent surveys, the percentage of teenagers who think they will be forced to be financially dependent on their parents until age 30 has more than doubled over the last few years. Now, as far as contagion and confiscation goes, we ran our own poll over at whatreallyhappened.com. The question was, do you think your money is safe in your bank savings account? 95% of the respondents said no. Now, of those 5% respondents who said, our money is, yes, I think my money is safe in my bank account, most of those were from outside the United States of America. I should have made it for Americans only, and the numbers would have been worse. But even 95% is telling you what's going on out here. Now, it's being reported in a number of places. I got my copy from worldbulletin.net here about the BRICS plan, a development bank to rival the World Bank. We know what this is going to do. This new development bank by BRICS will challenge the World Bank and the IMF for global financial domination. And that means the United States will be ordered by the money junkies, by the central bankers, to gin up a war against these companies. Brazil, Russia, the rest of them. And they're desperate for a war. They are desperate for a war. Go back to read All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. When they get into these messes, they get out of them, or at least they distract from them with a world war. Crash of 1907, get into World War I. Crash of 1929, get into World War II. Crash of 2008, look how far along we are into big mistake number 3. And they don't even care where the war starts. Now they're over there rattling their sabers with North Korea. And the stories are out, oh, North Korea, they're making all these dire threats. North Korea was provoked. North Korea was minding its own business until the U.S. started hitting them with sanctions and screaming at them and flying B-52s near their sovereign territory and having naval exercises off the coast. And North Korea, yeah, their leadership is a little overreactive, I will grant you that. And they cut off all communication with the South. The final line that was left open, the military hotline, has been cut off. There is no direct communication from North Korea to South Korea. The news is making a big deal out of the fact that North Korea went to the United Nations, and the way the corporate media is reporting it, they're threatening nuclear war. That's not what North Korea said. North Korea said, if the U.S. and Japan and South Korea continue to provoke us, we risk a nuclear war. Which is a very reasonable statement to make. But the corporate media is trying to spin it that North Korea is the one that's out of control, and they're just crazy, and they're bad, and they're evil, and we got to get a war going there. And I've seen the corporate media today carrying this story that North Korea is threatening to launch missiles against Guam and here in Hawaii and California. And you would think the people in the corporate, well, no, what am I saying? The people in the corporate media, they don't ever double-check the propaganda. They'd be out of a job. The longest range rocket North Korea currently has is the Taepodong 2. It does not have the range to reach either Hawaii or California. It can reach Guam. It can reach some of the westernmost Aleutian Islands. And the last time the North Koreans test-fired one, it fell apart in midair. It's bluff and it's bluster. Of course, we cannot rule out the possibility that the United States might set off a nuclear bomb, hopefully not here in Hawaii, and say, oh, those dastardly North Koreans, it's Pearl Harbor 2, and we're off into a real world war. So that when the people are standing up and saying, I'm hungry, I've lost my job, I've lost my home, well, there's a war on. Wasn't the bankers' fault. Wasn't our fault. We were just about to turn the situation around when those dastardly North Koreans kicked off World War III. That's the thinking. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And just responding again to Nick from Japan, there is no can or bottle of Coca-Cola in my office because I don't drink the stuff. I won't drink the aspartame, and I won't drink anything with high fructose corn syrup in there, which is basically all their products. I know both Coke and Pepsi briefly went back to a cane sugar version of the product, but apparently it wasn't a big success and they've discontinued it. I think maybe he was looking at this red can of silicone lubricant or this bottle, which is just filtered water. So I don't know where that came from. Anyway, story coming in, Cyprus apparently is hiring British security guards to be at the front door when they reopen the banks to prevent people from panicking. I think when the panic sets in, even these British security guards are going to have a hard time controlling it. Getting back over to the rush for war, and that's exactly what it is. The money junkies have gleefully sent hundreds of millions of human beings to horrible death and disfigurement in order to preserve their little Ponzi scheme fraud on the entire planet. And I think right now, from their point of view, it's just good business. If we have to let 1 billion people get killed, it'll be worth it if the remaining 6 billion are returned to the servitude of a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. That is the way they think. And that their mindset is revealed by this bank that just foreclosed on that 75-year-old woman. Over $49 in taxes they thought she owed. Turned out she didn't. And that Duke of Northumberland, one of his tenants on his estate, was 1 day late with the rent. Family's been on that property for 7 generations. 1 day late with the rent, kick them all off. That is the way the money junkies think. Think Bernie Madoff with the loot. Co-founder of NASDAQ, which should tell you something about NASDAQ, had more money than any human being could ever spend in a single lifetime, and it still wasn't enough. He had to set up his own little Ponzi scheme. It ran for 12 years while the SEC looked the other way, cheated his own investors out of $65 billion. You, the taxpayers, had to come up with a big chunk of the payback on that one. Now, getting back over here, the rush to war for the bankers. We must make the world safe for the Federal Reserve note. No sacrifice is too great. Give us all your kids. Small price to pay for the Federal Reserve note here. Israel is warning Lebanon of total destruction in a new war, saying the Israeli military is prepared for a very violent war should conflict spark on the border. What this means is Israel is getting ready to attack Lebanon again, go after that Litani River, and they're trying to figure out some way to make it look like it was Lebanon's fault. The Israeli Defense Forces are always screaming they're ready for a confrontation with Egypt. Who's the threat to world peace? Iran? I don't think so. We'll be right back. And aloha, American. Somebody just sent me an article from the BBC about how the U.S. is having to fly these nuclear-capable B-52s, along the border with North Korea in response to the escalating rhetoric. They got it completely backward. The escalating rhetoric is in response to the bombers and the aircraft carriers and the submarines and the guided missile destroyers the U.S. has been waving at North Korea for the last couple of weeks. They're desperate to make you think this is all North Korea's fault. It's the same stunt Roosevelt pulled with Japan. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. That's been pretty much destroyed. And if you've never seen it, there's a wonderful book by U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Robert B. Stinnett. It's called Day of Deceit. And he goes through all this information that was declassified in 1994 to lay out the case that Roosevelt not only knew the Japanese were coming to Pearl Harbor, he had deliberately provoked them, following an 8-step plan developed by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. ONI, they laid out an 8-step plan. Roosevelt started implementing it 1 year before the attack on Pearl Harbor. One of the steps in that plan was a show of military force off Japan's shores. And that's exactly what they're doing to North Korea. They're replaying McCollum's strategy to provoke North Korea into an action that can be pointed to as, oh, it was a surprise attack. Those dastardly North Koreans, we have to go off to war here. Make the world safe for private central banking. It's the same thing they did for World War II. And they're doing it here again. And I'm going to go ahead and try and comment to that effect on the BBC article. And imagine my shock, comments are disabled. Okay, a lot of that stuff. Now, over in Russia, this is an interesting story. When the Russian republics were formed and Putin came to power, he kicked out a bunch of their money junkies. Not all of them had to leave. Mostly the ones who were dual citizens got kicked out. Well, apparently one of the oligarchs who survived from the Soviet Union into the present has come to the end of his little ride. His name is Vitaly Malkin. And he's got ties to organized crime. He was trying to immigrate to Canada for 20 years. They would not allow him in because of his organized crime connections. He has been, up until now, in the Russian parliament until the National Post revealed that he is, in fact, a citizen of Israel and has hidden much of his wealth over in Canada. Now, the Russian government has a law that members of parliament have to be citizens of Russia and citizens of Russia only. They cannot be dual citizenship, and they cannot hold undeclared foreign investments. And this guy's guilty of both. See, Russia is smart. Russia has watched the decline of the United States of America. They're learning from our mistakes. And they're making sure that their government is thinking of Russia first, second, and third. And it's not infiltrated and subverted by all these dual nationals whose first loyalty is to a foreign power. Because Russia understands that is in large part what has destroyed the United States of America. So hats off to the Russians. They're being smart about this stuff. And Mr. Malkin is now out of his job from Parliament, and he may even be open to some criminal prosecution for breaking those laws. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm looking at an email from one of our longtime listeners and readers. One thing that bankers are not factoring into the scenario is the after effects of nuclear power plants being damaged or destroyed in World War III. Look at what's happening in Fukushima and apply that to all of the countries that have nuclear power. Well, the bankers don't think like that. The bankers will set off World War III and they'll blow up nuclear plants, chemical plants, all this damage, because what that means is after the war is over, the countries will have to borrow money to clean up the mess and rebuild again. Remember that broken window analogy, the creative destruction? That's the game they're playing. Look at all the damage left over from World War II. It was an opportunity for commerce for the bankers. Yes, your city is almost destroyed. We'll loan you the money at interest to build it back up again. Look at the after effects of depleted uranium everywhere that it's been used. Birth defects, not just among the targeted population in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Our own serving troops exposed to the dust from these munitions. They come home, they think life is going to go back to normal. They're away from the war zone, they get married, they have kids, and the kids are being born with serious birth abnormalities. It is an epidemic problem, and it's something that, again, the government and the corporate media don't want you thinking about. Because they don't want to discourage the little kiddies who are getting out of school and they can't find any kind of a job. They don't want to discourage them from running down to that recruitment center and sign up because TV has told them war is just a giant open-air Nintendo set. And they'll sit there comfortably and they'll rain death down on these white thermal bloom blobbies on the screen. And it'll all be fun and great joy. And it isn't. It really isn't. Now, we're starting to see a ramp-up of propaganda regarding Egypt. Now, the story appears to have been that there was a fight and a riot at a mosque in suburban Cairo, apparently triggered by Islamic hardliners. And there were apparently some Christians in the area who were beaten. That's the story. But the headline that we got in Fox News, Egyptian mosque turned into house of torture for Christians. And that isn't what happened. The mosque is back in the hands of its clergy and its owners. You ever see Fox News talking in those terms about Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo, calling them a house of torture? And we know for certain they are. What's going on here is that after Mubarak was driven from power by the Egyptian people, the United States and Israel wanted to get a Mubarak light as a replacement. Lost one puppet, let's get another puppet in there. Hard-fought election, massive vote fraud, and Morsi still won. Overwhelmingly. And Morsi has proven to be a very independent leader. He doesn't always listen to what the U.S. says. He doesn't always do what Israel wants. And even worse, because of his independence, because of his willingness to stand up to the money junkies in the United States and the money junkies in Israel, he's becoming a unifying force in the Middle East, which is what Saddam was doing before he was killed, and what Ahmadinejad is doing, which is why they're talking about war there. So we can already see what's cooking here in the books. Find a reason to go back in, invade Egypt, take out Morsi, and put a new obedient puppet back into power. And that's why we're seeing this propaganda coming out. This thing is escalating wildly out of control. France has now announced they're going to permanently station soldiers in Mali, at least until the gold runs out. Remember, it was just a temporary emergency humanitarian mission. It was launched exactly 1 week after Germany requested the Bank of France return all of Germany's bullion. And the Bank of France said, it's going to take us 5 years. Next week, they invade Mali, which happens to be Africa's third largest gold-producing nation, and the easiest one to invade, I might add. Getting over here to the gun grabbers, and they are getting desperate. We were hearing where Senator Rand Paul and Senator Lee and Senator Cruz were threatening to filibuster the gun control bill because of some, well, it's outright violation of the Second Amendment. And they're opposed to this new gun control bill because written into it is language, once it's passed, they can expand its scope. Apparently, the White House is now directly lobbying these three senators not to filibuster the gun bill. This is a violation of the separation of powers. The President does not have any control over the Congress other than he can suggest bills and he can exercise his veto. That's it. The President is not allowed to go into the Congress and tell representatives and senators how they will vote and how they will behave. It is an abuse of his official powers. Watching on the corporate media today, they're going on and on, we've got to ban assault rifles. We've got to ban assault rifles. I got a clue for you guys. Assault rifles were banned back in 1986. They are already illegal. You cannot buy them absent a very heavy tax. If you're willing to pay the tax, you can own one. What they're after now are these semi-automatic sporting firearms that look like assault rifles. But an assault rifle is fully automatic. They're trying to blur the line and make all guns look bad. We've even seen that in some of these other areas like, well, New York, where anything that's semi-automatic is now being called an assault rifle. Assault rifles are weapons of war. They are machine guns. And they are already illegal. They're coming after the non-machine guns now. And by the way, I would like to remind you all of United States versus Miller. This is a United States Supreme Court ruling that declared the Second Amendment reserves to the people military arms. If the U.S. Army is using it, you have a right under the Second Amendment to have one of those. That's the United States Supreme Court that ruled that. Now, as I mentioned to that caller, over at MSNBC, in trying to support Bloomberg's gun control efforts to justify his $12 million ad blitz coming out of the tax revenues of a city with 50,000 homeless, hungry people right now, they're trying to prop it up, and they actually went down on this panel discussion they were having, saying that opposition to Bloomberg's gun control efforts is just anti-Semitism. That's the new talking point. You're a Jew hater if you don't give us your guns. This is desperation on the cusp of madness, and it underscores how panicked they are to get the guns by hook, by crook, by any lie that they think will gain traction with the American people. Because what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Cyprus, what's happening in Spain, is going to come to the United States of America. The contagion will come here. Bernanke's saying, no, it won't happen. He said exactly the same thing about the mortgage-backed security fraud disaster. The contagion is contained. It won't ever reach Europe. Boy, it sure did. That's why they're in the mess they're in. It all goes back to that giant Wall Street scam, the mortgage-backed security fraud, for which nobody on Wall Street has been arrested. Under the three strikes principle, we've got people in prison who were sent to jail for stealing a pair of socks. And these Wall Street bankers who stole billions and plunged the world into this horrible depression, nope, they're walking around free. Got a lot of bodyguards around them. When the people who are running Goldman Sachs come to work in the morning, you're probably surprised to hear this. The New York Police Department, funded by the taxpayer, will close off the street in front of the building while this parade of armored, bulletproof limousines shows up, and the rulers of the world, Goldman Sachs, who are doing God's work according to Lloyd Blankfein, go into their offices to figure out another way they can carve a big chunk of the planet off and put it in their pockets. And the gun grabbers are out there saying, you don't need guns. The police are in control of crime. No, they aren't. In fact, there's another story coming out of Blacklisted News. There's been another case of the police raiding the wrong house in Chicago, kicked down the door, threatened the children, shot and killed their dog, had the wrong house. Anyway, it's crazy, crazy stuff. Over at Black Box Voting, which is run by this wonderful lady named Bev Harris, and there's this HBO documentary called Hacking Democracy, and if you have not seen it, you must watch. It shows just how incredibly fraudulent the U.S. election system has become. It's all fraud. It's all lies and illusions. We're the city of Oz. We've got this government up there hiding behind flaming papier-mâché masks, feeding us lies about wicked witches, keep us all in our place. The wicked witches, of course, being this Al-Qaeda. But apparently, they have now proven that there was vote fraud in the absentee ballots down in Miami. And it's a documented situation. They've had it in front of a grand jury. And apparently, one of the ways that the perpetrators were protected, when the evidence in this case was turned over to investigators, the IP address of the people on the other end of the fraud had been blanked out. Oh, we don't have a copy that's got the IPs intact. I don't know who blocked it out. Okay, our lights just took a dip. We got a big storm coming in here. So if all of a sudden I stop talking and you start hearing polka music, you'll understand why that's going on here. Speaking of the web, the whole global internet got slowed down. Well, we got to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about an internet slowdown that a lot of people noticed over the last couple of days. And there was something going on out on the net. We even noticed it here. It was interfering with our feed to the radio show briefly. Was it the Chinese? Was it Al-Qaeda? Was it the North Koreans? Was it those dastardly Russians? Actually, it turned out to be none of the above. There's an organization called Spam House. And it is an organization that keeps and maintains lists of servers around the world that are known sources of spam, malware, hacking attacks. And they added a domain called Cyberbunker to their list as a known source of massive amounts of email and spamming and DOS attacks. And Cyberbunker came out and said, we don't do that kind of a thing. And then almost immediately, a denial of service attack from the entire planet started hitting Spam House servers. So that's what's going on out there. There's a lot of skullduggery out there on the internet, much of it by governments, I might add. You know, ordinary people have websites like mine. You are required under the rules to have all of your contact information and identification in your what's called your Who Is record. And that's how early on we were able to identify certain websites posing as Arab media, tracking them down to Israel. And so all of a sudden we get this domains by proxy in Arizona, which gets around the rules by registering all their domains as owned by domain by proxy, and our address is in Arizona, and you don't know where the source information is coming. It's a cutout to prevent the tracking of websites with a nefarious purpose. See, we all have to follow the rules. So forth and so on. The FBI is still demanding real-time access to emails and chats. Remember, we were talking the other day where they were saying, oh, you're going to have to hold your information in your email, and after 6 months we can read it. And I said, there isn't any point to keeping it 6 months and reading it because a lot happens in 6 months' time. Now the FBI is back to, we've got to have real-time. We've got to be scanning constantly. We've got to watch everybody. So, again, all of this is unconstitutional. The Constitution is not a list of what the government is allowed to do as much as it is a list of the things the government is not allowed to do. And everybody who wins an elected office and stands up there and swears that oath to the Constitution is agreeing to abide by those rules. And if they don't abide by them, they're no longer the legitimate government. We're going to go back to the phones. Zane in Washington, welcome back to the show. What's going on right now?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, I'm the producer of the video, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars.
Yes, boy, did that really take off.
Yeah, and I just wanted to let the public know that I have released that into the public domain. I've surrendered all my copyright rights, you know, for making money on it or anything, and given it to the public, which means that they can make copies of it and distribute it as widely as possible.
I think that's an excellent thing. Thank you very much for that generosity. And by the way, the original article from which that video was based, I'm getting word it's being translated into all these other languages. And yes, there's a Microsoft Translate bar at the top of the page, but apparently people like Italy are doing a regular human translation, and it's starting to get republished in all these countries all over Europe. And so they're going to start realizing what it is that's going on behind the scenes of these banker palaces.
Well, you know, Michael, if you were to take that project into a video shop, and you know this fairly well, I think, a 43-minute documentary would cost you some money. It would, you know, I think that the video work that I did there represents about $10,000 worth of video work.
Well, yes, you're right. It does.
And yeah, and your work. In developing the script and so forth, that's worth a lot of money too. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the two of us, we've paid our dues. But the public out there, there's people that should have an extra $10,000 or $20,000. There are people that believe in, having the public educated in civics and so forth. And I'd like to challenge those people that now that these rights have been surrendered, that this is in the public domain, you are encouraged to go download that video and go to a production house and spend $10,000 or $20,000 making copies of that DVD, and you know, have a shipment of 30 or 40,000 of those drop shipped to your doorstep, and get some high school kids or college kids to go out and give the public a civics lesson, because at this late date, we really do need to educate the public in regards to civics. We're at a crisis. We
absolutely are, but we don't need to rely on people who've got an extra $10,000 or $15,000 that the banks haven't confiscated yet. If everybody who's listening to this show downloads that video, and I'll put the link back up on whatreallyhappened.com during this coming commercial break, just make 5 or 6 or 10 copies locally using your CD burner and hand them to your family and friends, and just say, you are free to copy this, and hand it out. And it will get out. It is getting out. This thing, I think this was the one article I wrote that was the most viral of everything I've done on this website for the last going on 20 years. It really took off, and I think that's because people understood at some gut level what was going on, what was driving these wars, and why the wars always seem to show up at the same time as these financial disasters. We got to take a break for commercials. Zane, thank you for the video. Thank you for putting it in the public domain, and you've made a tremendous contribution. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah, Michael. Is there any smaller denominations of gold that you can use for barter, as opposed to the junk silver? And how do you tell if gold is real? Like when you're in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of people and stuff like that.
Well, Again, I'm not an expert on the current denominations of gold investment coins. You probably want to go to Republic Trading Group about that. Have you ever seen this old cliche? It's in the movies, it's in cartoons, where somebody takes a gold coin and bites it. That's because that's based on reality. Pure 24-karat gold is so soft, you will leave teeth marks in it. And I know that all of a sudden there are these tungsten gold-plated fake gold coins out there, and obviously if you try and bite one of those, you're not going to leave a significant dent in it. That's one way of doing it. I think the reason people are focusing on the junk silver is it's available in large supply. It is available at the melt price. These are well-known, recognized coins in the general population, where a small gold quarter ounce or whatever the small coins are might not be recognized, and people would be a little bit more reluctant to take it. So if you're looking at something for barter in the post-Federal Reserve era, I think the junk silver is really the best way to go. It's known, it is uniform, it is recognized by the general population that you're going to be bartering with, and that's really the way to go. As far as gold is concerned, for the large bullion blocks, I would think it would make sense for these large gold brokerages to invest in a hospital ultrasound machine, and you can get them on eBay for a couple of $1,000s, where if you have a gold bullion bar and you put that ultrasound probe on it, if there is tungsten inside there, it will show up immediately. And I think probably a good reputation builder for anybody who's doing this kind of bullion sales is to just have the machine right there in the storefront, right there in the lobby, and just say, look, you want to buy a bar? Let's put it on there, run the ultrasound, bingo, you know it is completely solid gold all the way through. Okay,
1960. Oh, yeah. If you have a 1964 dime and it's 90% silver, how do you do? Are you just going to go to a chart and then you're going to know how much it's worth if you're going to buy something off somebody?
No, like see, you're falling into a trap here of thinking that when you're using the junk silver after the collapse of the Federal Reserve, that you have to go through a conversion or calculate 90%. You don't need to. It's a 10-cent piece in the new economy. You don't start thinking that you have to equate it back to its worth in Federal Reserve dollars, because at the point you're actually doing that, the Federal Reserve notes are going to be worthless, like the Zimbabwe currency. And people will just automatically falling into say, you know, what do you want for that gallon of gas? Oh, give me 35 cents in silver. And that's the way they'll be thinking. There won't be conversion charts. They won't be worrying about the fact that the silver dime isn't 100% silver. Because the silver content is the money. The extra metal is just for durability. And they'll be thinking, pre-1965, give me 35 cents in pre-65 coins, and that's the price. They won't be going back and forth to conversions to the Federal Reserve note, because the Federal Reserve note will be worthless.
Oh, well, if the Federal Reserve note is worthless, how are they going to have a number for the amount of worth that silver is?
You don't need to worry about the worth of the silver. People will simply be thinking of them in terms of their face value. Like I said, how much for the gallon of gas? Give me 35 cents in pre-1965 coin. And that's how simple it's going to be.
Okay, I gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah. It's a shame, that, you're older, I think are you 60 years old?
Yes, I'm 60.
Okay. Well, I got 20 years on you the other way. But, I mean, it's like I'm just trying to hold on to what I got. Because they're just going to come and take it.
You and the rest of planet Earth. That's what we're all trying to do. And we're trying to reach out to our friends who are still in denial, and, oh, it can't happen here, and our government would never allow this to happen. Our government caused it to happen all the way back in 1913, when a bunch of corrupted Congress critters and a corrupted president sold the soul of the nation to the private central bankers in exchange for campaign donations. That was when the United States became doomed.
The dollar is up and the market is up today. The euro was getting a little weaker. Gold is just sitting there. Gold is being held down probably by these mechanisms, and of course the naked shorting, and with the hedge funds.
Actually, the way the gold prices are being held down are with these gold futures contracts, the paper contracts. Anytime gold is going to go up and they've run out of physical to dump on the market to drive it back down again, they'll push the gold prices down with these paper contracts. Plus, apparently over in Europe, where they're still investigating the LIBOR scandal, apparently evidence has surfaced that the London gold and silver fix is in fact fixed as well and being manipulated. So
these bankers, they know that eventually they're going to come after your savings. You know what I mean?
Of course they are.
And if you don't like it, they're going to intimidate you with a hollow point bullet. You know, with their little army over there.
Well, the best way to prevent that from happening is don't leave your money someplace where they can grab it.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, Michael.
All righty. See, if your money is all just piled up there in Scrooge McDuck's money bin, then the money junkies can come in and just help themselves to however much they need. But if every single American has a significant part of their savings in their home, that makes it a little bit more difficult to go door to door to door to door and search all 100 million households. Looking in the cookie jars and under the mattresses and in that mayonnaise jar buried out by the pineapple plantation. You're going to spend more supporting those uniformed thieves called the police department. It's going to cost you more than you're going to get in return. Because most Americans don't have that kind of savings. And again, when it does happen here, I would presume that it's only going to be the over $100,000 accounts, because otherwise the FDIC, well, of course they could just simply say, well, the FDIC doesn't have to pay off on a government bank or confiscation. They're just changing the rules to suit themselves. But again, if you want to leave part of your money in the savings account, that's fine. I'm not saying empty it completely, but just have some of it as home. Look what happened in Cyprus. When it hit over there, the ATMs shut down, they had limits, people are going hungry, businesses are going out of business because they don't have cash liquidity to run the commerce on. And so prudence says you should have at least part of your savings under your control. If it's not under your control, it's functionally not yours. That's what Cyprus just proved. So, anyway, moving right along here. As you're probably aware, and for those of us who are space enthusiasts, the current plan by NASA is to deorbit intentionally the International Space Station sometime around 2020. And considering how much it costs to put up there, I think it's a hideous waste. We know that the first space station, Mir, was kept going and doing useful science for years after its expected lifespan. Of course, we know that the ISS is having all kinds of problems. The finest American manufacturer for at least some of those components. Russia has now announced they have a large accumulation of modules that were for the ISS that were never sent up because of budget cuts. And they have announced that when the U.S. brings down the ISS, which means we won't even have a space station anymore, which is okay because we don't actually have the rockets to send people up there anyway. Russia is going to take all of these modules that were never used, they're going to put them up there and build a whole new space station. I think is a very, very good idea. Their economy is doing fine. That caller was absolutely right. The stock market here in the U.S. is being shoved up. It was a huge drop at the beginning, and as usual, the plunge protection team and the high-frequency traders are trying to drive it back up. But the real shock coming out of this is the euro is dropping, not just against the dollar. It's dropping against the Russian ruble. And I went out and took a look. And here's a real shocker for you. For so far this year, 2013 overall, the U.S. dollar is in decline against the Russian ruble. What Russia is doing is working. They learned from our mistakes here in the United States of America, unlike the Canadians, who went into that whole thing. Iran is getting ready to build the world's highest concrete dam. They're out there building things and commerce and deals and manufacturing and agriculture, and all the United States has left is their weapons that they're waving at everybody, and they're not even all that really good. Back to the phones. Ted in Wisconsin. Aloha, Ted. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I got a quick little thing about electronic deposits. I have a girlfriend. She works in AmeriCorps. And as being an AmeriCorps member, the only way to get paid, the only way they allow you to even take the job is if you have a bank account, because they only do electronic deposits.
Yes.
So one of the training days is where they have bankers come in and help everybody set up an account, because they're dealing with a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who's never really had an account before. Before my girlfriend got that job, she worked at Macy's part-time. And even Macy's was set up the same way. They said that before we can hire you, you have to have a bank account, because we will not pay you with a check. We only do electronic deposits. So I was just kind of thinking, if you're sitting in Cyprus right now, it would be pretty interesting if that's the only way you could get paid.
Well, the bankers certainly want that to be the only way they get paid, because it basically forces you back into using their banking services, for which they get a hefty fee. See, when the United States was started, everybody had the freedom to choose whether or not they would do business with a bank. You were free to say, I want to put my money in the bank, or I don't want to put my money in the bank. You were free to say, I do want to borrow from the bank, or I don't want to borrow from the bank. You could go through your entire life without setting foot inside a bank. Banking was optional, and that is what made it a naturally stable system. Because when the public borrowed to the point where they said, I can't borrow anymore, they could stop borrowing, and it would steady the system out. But because of this private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, you've lost that freedom. Everything you touch in commerce involves the bank, and they get a piece of the action, and the debt is always skyrocketing. Now, I got an email from somebody on this very issue about electronic deposits. Well, you do need a bank account to operate in commerce, and you are using that bank account to pay your bills. And nobody here is telling you not to pay your bills. What I'm saying is, leave the money in that account to pay your bills, take the rest out, bring it home. It's just common sense. It's prudent. And, and just, with every new paycheck, make sure your bills are paid, bring the rest home in cash.
Yeah, but like the people in Cyprus, if they're only allowed to withdraw $100 a week to pay their bills or to buy food and stuff like that, a family of 5 or 6 on a one-income family, I mean, it's pretty absurd. Oh,
it's absolutely going to crash the place, because the bankers are going to decide how much money you need to live on for the next week, and that means that even if the banks open in Cyprus on Thursday, people are going to be so stressed for cash, they're not going to be buying anything other than food. You're going to see their entire retail sector collapse. Businesses have already closed their doors over there because they can't pay their employees. This cannot work in the long run. It was a desperation ploy to try and prop up the private central bank without massive overprinting, which would have harmed the wealth of the money junkies. They're so in the grip of their addiction, they're not thinking clearly. And again, go back and look at any drug addict you've ever seen. All they're thinking about is that next fix. And they're completely oblivious to the long-term consequences of their behavior, how it impacts themselves, how it impacts the families and community around them. It's just invisible because they're in the grip of this addiction. If you go back and you look at that wonderful documentary, Inside Job, that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary 2 years ago and then promptly vanished in the American media, they talked about this study where they wired up these Wall Street bankers, investors, to brain scan, and they found out that every time these traders made a big financial score, the part of their brain that lit up was exactly the same part that lights up when they do cocaine.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that before. I got to go, but I really appreciate all your info, man. Keep it up.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Now, apparently we just got a caller calling in about pre-64 versus pre-65, and this is going back and forth, so let's state this one more time. The last year that U.S. coinage had actual metal value in it, and I know that if you're considering copper, some of the pennies later than that went up, but we're talking about the silver coinage. The last year they had silver in the coins was 1964, and so that's why we're saying pre-1965, because we're not including 1965. And again, the quarters and the dimes and the rest of them, they're not 100% solid silver or nickel or whatever. They were designed to have the value of metal in them. The extra metal in there is for durability, so they wouldn't wear out. And again, in the post-Federal Reserve environment, we don't need to worry about what the actual silver content is. We don't need to worry about what they would be worth in Federal Reserve notes, because the Federal Reserve notes will be worthless. People will simply barter in terms of the face value of the coin, knowing the coin itself has worth. The coinage that was issued by the Roman Empire was used in commerce long after Rome itself was gone, because the money was the coin itself, the silver denarius, the bronze sestertius. The metal was what was worth something. It wasn't the good faith and credit of the Roman Empire, because they didn't have any toward the end. And the same will be true of that pre-1965 silver U.S. coinage. It'll still be usable for commerce, because the value is in the metal, not in the good wishes of some private central banker with a license to counterfeit. All righty. Now, we were talking about how Russia is going to put up their own space station with the leftover modules from the ISS that were never flown because of budget constraints. We're talking about Iran is building the new highest dam in the world. They're all out there doing these wonderful works of engineering. We are now hearing, and this was reported by CBS, that apparently on the brand new eastern span of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, parts are already failing. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about up in San Francisco, which is a beautiful city. My wife is from San Francisco originally. And we actually were living there for a few months during the production of the Day After Tomorrow, the Al Gore global warming will cause an ice age piece of propaganda. And it is a beautiful city, and I really did like it there. They have been investing a huge amount of money in a brand new San Francisco to Oakland Bay Bridge. Remember, the previous one was severely damaged in an earthquake, and they started building this new bridge. Well, apparently they've got a problem, because on this massive pier where sections of the bridge come together, there's this concrete cap, and embedded in the concrete cap are these threaded steel rods. They're 16 feet long. They're about 8 inches in diameter. And as the workers are tightening the fittings down to the specified torque settings, the rods are snapping. 38 of them so far. This is the brand new bridge. And of course, all of the union steelworkers are saying, this is what happens when you have Chinese companies coming in to build this important infrastructure. And then, of course, they had to shut up when it turned out that these steel rods were provided by an American company. And apparently the problem is the formula for the steel had an excess of free hydrogen floating around in the mix, which makes steel very brittle. And brittle is not something you want to have on a bridge, especially in an earthquake zone. And it is just a reminder that the United States of America has lost the ability to build quality, durable, anything, whether it's the Boeing Dreamliner, the F-22, the F-35, now the Bay Bridge. The thing is brand new, and it's already showing problems. Too many corners are being cut by the money junkies. Somebody over at that American company making these rods wasn't verifying the formula was correct before the castings were made. It's just amazing. All right, going to take a phone call. Troy in Hawaii. Aloha, Troy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. New neighbor. I'm calling you from Wacky Wacky.
Okay.
I've been listening to your show for years now. I really appreciate your perspective. I appreciate that you're on the air.
Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to make one note that the Kennedy half dollars from 65 to 70 are 40% silver.
That is correct, and that's also the Eisenhower dollars had a silver content, which was actually reduced at one point as well. So you have to be careful about those.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, but all of these clad coins, the one where you look at the edge and it shows copper, those are absolutely worthless.
Slugs.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Well, I really thank you for what you do. I listen to your show every day, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and aloha, and have yourself a really good afternoon when it finally becomes noon over here. All right, we're going to take a station identification break. We'll be back with the final hour of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And CNN is now going on and on about the surge of 3D printers and people able to manufacture guns in their own home with printable receivers. And it's actually easy to make a gun. A machine gun, yeah, that's a lot of work here. But there's a huge community of black powder enthusiasts in this nation who are routinely making very accurate long rifles, revolvers. I think one of my favorites is the recreation of the Confederate LeMat, which was 9 .44 caliber round balls around a 20-gauge shotgun shell. It was an officer's gun. Very useful for home defense. Now, over at CBS, despite all the screaming about gun control and waving all the bloody shirts, support for gun control is falling in America. It's in decline. In fact, support for stricter gun controls is now the minority position. Michael Moore is out there ranting and raving about For the Children and the rest of it, and he's being an absolute complete hypocrite on this. Because Michael Moore is on videotape, and I have it linked to my SSRI resources page, which you can get to. Look in the right margin, you'll see that big pill. Just click on that. All kinds of information about the link between prescription antidepressants and all of this senseless violence, and in there is this video of Michael Moore admitting that much of the mass violence we're seeing in our society is linked to these prescription medications. But the goal now is to take away the guns, because if the people are completely disarmed, everything will be wonderful, just like it is in Cyprus. Just got an email from a listener in Vilnius saying his electricity's been blinking intermittently for 2 days because of the winter weather. It's not a good time because the hard disk failed to read a registry file. He's having a repair from that. He's sympathizing with my problems with computers. And yeah, they're not built any more reliably than the F-22, the Dreamliner, the F-35, and the San Francisco Bay Bridge. So we're going to talk a little bit about global warming and the absence thereof, and how desperate some of the propaganda is getting. And some of these stories are from late last week. I didn't get to them early, but I'm going to cover them. Basically, over in Sweden, their television meteorologist, Per Stenborg, is saying spring is nowhere in sight. They're saying they're going to be in the grip of a cold winter right through the coming Easter weekend here. Press TV is reporting that deaths from the extreme cold in Great Britain could reach as high as 30,000. There are a lot of people on pensions, especially those with pensions coming through Cyprus. They can't afford the skyrocketing oil and gas prices. They're living in their homes without heat. They're wrapping themselves in blankets, and they're still freezing to death. Over on the Isle of Man, this is supposed to be the season when your livestock is, giving birth. And the Isle of Man's farming community is facing what is described as a catastrophe, because much of their livestock, their sheep, is currently buried in the snow. They're going out there with the pole in the snow going, is he there, is he there? Get a, oh, there's one, dig him out. Thousands of sheep and cattle have died in the thick snow that is falling on Great Britain. British media back in 2000, snow is a thing of the past. Your children will never know what it looks like. You'll have to describe it. No, we won't. Al Gore repeated that in 2009. Snow, a thing of the past. Most of the United States is still covered in snow. Kiev is buried right now. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple of breaking stories before we get back to global warming. There's been a major landslide on Whidbey Island in Washington State. Huge landslide, which, looking at all these sinkholes that are opening up all over the place, and it's like the entire United States is going to get sucked down to the core of the earth here. Maybe the Mayans were right, but their math system didn't have a zero, so maybe they were off by 1 year. Another story that's coming, apparently there has been a bombing in Athens Nobody reported injured, but apparently damage to a building belonging to a prominent businessman, or maybe he's just cashing in his insurance. But that's what's happening. Now, back to global warming, the absence thereof. This is coming from the Daily Mail, where I am still blocked from commenting, I might add. Basically saying the big freeze is going to continue in Britain until the end of April. And apparently what's going on there is the jet stream is not shifting northward as it normally does to bring milder temperatures to Britain and Europe. It's in fact been pushed to an unusually southerly location. It's down around the north part of Africa. And it is a reminder that climate is controlled on Earth by forces way beyond the ability of humans to influence. Solar radiation, shape of the Earth's orbit, where the jet stream goes. But Al Gore wants you to think it's all because of that nasty carbon dioxide that you're putting out there. Even though plants need carbon dioxide to grow. The more carbon dioxide, the more plants will have, the more food there will be. Commercial greenhouses deliberately increase the carbon dioxide inside because it makes the plants grow bigger, faster, and produce more saleable crop. But Al Gore wants you to think it's a poison. The EPA has declared it a pollutant. It's nonsense. It is essential to the cycle of life. So now they're saying that the big freeze is going to keep on in Britain and presumably Europe as much as the end of next month. Belgium's reporting the coldest March 23rd since 1873. Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. Britain braced for the coldest March weekend in 50 years. Snow, blizzards, flood, wreaking havoc, disruption. The cold weather is, as I mentioned before, it's hitting the gas supplies. Britain has gone through their own stockpiles. They're having to basically start importing gas and oil to keep homes heated. They all believed this Kool-Aid about global warming. They didn't stockpile as much natural gas. They didn't buy as much road grit. They didn't maintain all their snow plows. They said, we're going to let a couple of them go. We're not going to need them. And of course, as there is a scarcity of gas bills are going up. One report says 15%. Another one says as much as 30%. Ireland is getting hit, hammered. 40,000 homes and businesses across Northern Ireland are without electricity. Alberta, Canada. Highway pileup leaves 100 injured, blamed on the snowstorm here. Now, do you remember the reason we call this Climate Gate all goes back to a leakage of internal emails and even software code from within the global warming community, which I like to call the global warming cult. They believe it's global warming, and if the evidence doesn't support it, we must change the evidence. Kind of the same attitude the church had when Galileo showed up. So retrograde motion doesn't support our dogma of Earth as the center of all. We've got to change the science to suit our religious beliefs here. So anyway, these emails came out, and it showed, documented, the collusion that was going on when the real world didn't match the dire warnings of the Carbonazis. That's where we got the expression, hide the decline. That was in a quote in there from one of these emails. And the software code, the source code, showed where they were rigging it to produce their hockey stick, to scare everybody into carbon taxes and obedience to a global environmental authority. Gigantic fraud. Now, the individual, who is still anonymous, that leaked the first two batches of emails and software code has now leaked a third one. Just released everything. 220,000 encrypted emails and documents. They're not encrypted for you. They were encrypted when they were being stored. It's been broken here. And it basically just underscores everybody in this fraud was intentionally commiserating with each other. How do we hide the fact that temperatures have gone into a decline? Remember that video from Minnesotans for Global Warming, Hide the Decline, and Michael Mann sued them and they put out a second version that didn't use his face? 30% of GISS global warming is due to data tampering starting in 2005. That was being reported over at Stephen Goddard's WordPress account. It's a gigantic fraud. This government lied to you about global warming, tried to make you believe it was all your fault, to guilt you out of more money and obedience, just as this government lied to you about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, as they're lying to you about Iran's weapons of mass destruction, as they're lying to you about the unemployment rates and the LIBOR rates and the price of gold. How much longer are you going to sit there and just let the government go on lying to you like that? It is time to stand up. Anytime anybody in the government and the media are out there bloviating their lies and scream, "You are a liar. There is no law says I have to believe you when you spout such nonsense, and I'm not going to listen to you anymore. You lied about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Lied about the 16th Amendment. Lied about the constitutionality of the Federal Reserve. Been lying for going on 5 years about, oh, the economy's turning around, we're in a recovery, green shoots, lights at end of tunnel. Just nothing but lie after lie after lie after lie to cover up their own stupidity and, in worst case, criminality. We, the American people, are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. The former Soviet Union would have blushed from how much the U.S. government is lying. Obviously, the dire warnings about global warming have cratered. Epic fail. Epic, epic fail. And there are only two explanations. The very most generous explanation we can have for NASA, NOAA, IPCC, the United Nations, Hadley CRU, on and on and on, for being this wrong is they were stupid. They were wrong. They didn't really know the science. They had the evidence in front of them that the world was cooling, and they just didn't want to see it. Human nature, completely abandoned scientific principle, literally blocked anybody with an opposing point of view from being published in the journals. Just human nature. That's the most generous explanation. The less generous explanation is this whole global warming hysteria was a manufactured propaganda campaign to trick the people of planet Earth out of their money as carbon taxes and into obedience to that global environmental authority. And given that the carbon Nazis, even now with Europe, Great Britain, seemingly on the edge of a new mini ice age, they're still pushing global warming. Al Gore was out there saying, now's the time for a carbon tax. He knows if he doesn't get it now, it's not going to happen. Mother Nature has definitely kneecapped his desire to be the world's first carbon billionaire. And the fact that they're still pushing this nonsense in the face of the empirical evidence before the eyes of everybody holding a snow shovel shows it was an intentional fraud. There are conspiracies against ordinary people conducted by government, education, corporations. We've got one on full display. Anytime somebody says there can't be a wide-ranging conspiracy because everybody would know about it, we got one right here, the global warming hoax. And yeah, we all know about it. Those people who hooked their reputations to global warming are desperate to try and salvage it. They don't want to admit they were wrong. Worse, they don't want to admit they sold out. In exchange for funding to prove global warming, they said, oh yes, global warming's real. And now their reputations are on the line. Some of these people are being threatened with loss of tenure for being that far out of touch with the subject they are supposed to be experts on. Over at 12160, they've got this interesting article where now scientists are blaming earthworms for global warming. Great, let the earthworms pay the carbon taxes. Remember when they were screaming about the plight of the polar bears and they're drowning in the melting oceans? Polar bears can swim, by the way, for up to 60 miles. And they float when they're asleep because that fur is hollow. The strands of their white fur is hollow. It's an air for insulation, and they float. They don't drown. Polar bears have grown in population so much while the carbonazis are screaming they're going extinct. Now, ecologists are saying they're going to have to kill off the surplus polar bears. There's too many. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Greg in Texas. Aloha, Greg. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You keep saying...
Yes.
You keep saying there was none, and I was there, sitting by my radio, and for 6 weeks we couldn't go in, and I remember my feelings at the time was, let's bomb him. I mean, I was listening to AM radio.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting that slant, the corporate media slant. And I have to say I was wrong, but I still don't know if there was any weapons or not. And I'm wondering, do you know something I don't know?
Yes, I do, because when it was all over, it turned out that Iraq did not have, nor were they building, any nuclear weapons. Israel had claimed that Iraq was building nuclear weapons underneath their civilian power station at Osirak, which led Israel to bomb the facility. Once the invasion was over, International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors went in and found that it was just a power station. There was no clandestine nuclear weapons lab under that power station the way Israel has underneath Dimona. The only weapons they found were empty shells intended for biological weapons that the U.S. had given to Saddam when Saddam was acting as the U.S. errand boy attempting to overthrow Iran. They never found anything.
Well, he had 6 weeks to get rid of anything.
Wait a minute. Can you imagine Saddam is being invaded? The entire U.S. military is coming into his country, and he's going to get rid of his strongest deterrent? That never made any sense. That never made any sense at all. I mean, he's already being invaded. They're coming to kill him. Can you imagine him standing there with his little vial of anthrax saying, I better not use this or I'm really going to be in trouble? That was that's absolutely ridiculous claim to be making. And, you know, there are people who are still in denial. They don't want to admit that the U.S. government invaded Iraq over the fact that Iraq was selling their oil for euros. Okay? And this idea that, oh, he had the weapons of mass destruction, but he hid them. While he's being invaded, the reason to have those weapons is to deter invasion, to use against an invading army. You're not going to invest in those things, and then at the point where you're being invaded, you're going to get rid of them. It's nonsense. It was a lie. Just like the lies they're trying to talk about Iran. I've heard this nonsense so many times. Oh, he did it. He had nuclear weapons. He had germs. He had gas. He had all of this stuff. But he got rid of it real quick because he didn't want to prove that the world was right. Well, at the point he's being invaded, the bombs are falling. His nation is being sent back to the Dark Ages. He doesn't care what the rest of the world thinks anymore. He knew they were coming to kill him because he was daring to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. If he'd had the weapons, he would have used them. All right, back to the phones. Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
2 really quick comments. Breaking news on CNN. I don't know if you've seen it. Justin Bieber has a pimple. Just came out. Just flashed over the screen.
Well, stop the presses on that one.
The second is, yeah, when somebody breaks into my house, the first thing I do is run out back and bury my weapon.
Yes, very good analogy. Very good analogy. Thank you.
Now, the main point of it is, Mike, something amazing happened, and I'm making an appeal to your audience, because your audience, I think, is a very smart audience.
They are.
And a very active audience. I started doing something not too long ago, probably about 6 months ago, and now it's coming back full circle. I started handing out pamphlets.
Mm-hmm.
One-page, trifold pamphlets. Sound familiar?
Yes.
I ran into somebody who had one of my pamphlets, and I said, I don't remember your face. Where did you get this? He said, a friend of mine printed this off and was handing it out on campus. And it was about basically the Federal Reserve and, a bunch of other things, just sort of like, shocking things to wake people up. Man, and I've now seen it from 4 or 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
My name's not on it. I want nothing from it.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to me that I've seen just random people, random strangers.
Well, people who are, I'm sorry to cut you off, we're almost out of time in this segment. People who are my age, which is considerable, we remember pamphlets are what we used before there was an internet. And by the way, if you're handing out information on a paper pamphlet, Big Brother doesn't know what you're doing unless you hand it to an FBI informant, and they're usually obnoxious enough where you can identify them. But yeah, pamphleting, that's what the Order of the White Rose used against Hitler. Pamphlets are very useful, and they don't go dark in a power failure.
I urge your audience to do the same, because if that's 100,000, 200,000, 250,000 people that are doing the same, it gets out there, man. I'm telling you.
It really does. It really does. It is a good way to go. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Mike. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. James in North Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to ask you about something I had heard on another talk show back a couple of weeks ago, and see if you had any information about it. That I had heard that one of the first things that we did once we got into Baghdad was to loot the National Museum.
That's sort of, kind of close to accurate. What happened is, and the United States government was severely criticized for this, when they got into Baghdad, they posted guards all around the oil ministry, and they left the museum unguarded, which meant it could be looted. Now, some of that stuff turned up in the hands of the media presence there, the network cameramen and stuff. We know some American politicians got some of that loot, and I think the reason that was being done is a means to erase the cultural identity of the conquered people. We know that Israel's political justification for sitting where it is rests on the claim of the kingdoms of David and Solomon in the First Temple, for which there is zero archaeological evidence and a long history of fraud, like the Temple Pomegranate and the Jehoash tablet, to try and sell that idea. So all of these other surrounding nations, like Egypt, that have these incredible archaeological riches. You can't take 3 steps without tripping over the artifacts of their ancient history. And so for Israel to have virtually nothing to support it, they have a severe desire to wipe out the cultural identity of nations around them. We saw that when there was that traveling exhibit of Palestinian embroidery that simply vanished from the Los Angeles International Airport. We've seen it where the United States literally ran a runway over the ruins of the ancient city of Ur, and I think that was why the museum was left wide open, to basically destroy the cultural identity. Here in Hawaii, when the Kingdom of Hawaii was overthrown, the first thing they did was they went to Iolani Palace and they took everything out of there and they just sold it for pennies on the dollar and said, take it, get it out of here, took down all the crests, just sanitized the building so it no longer represented the identity of Hawaii's royal families. The Friends of Iolani Palace have gotten much of that stuff back. They actually found one of the king's chairs in a thrift store. I mean, but that's part of what you go in, you destroy the old culture so that it makes it easier for you to dominate the culture. The Christian missionaries down in Easter Island destroyed all the tablets with the Rongo Rongo writing on them. It was the only Polynesian society that actually had its own indigenous written language. And all the Christian missionaries took it and burned all of the tablets. So all of that history was just completely wiped out and destroyed. And I think that was exactly the same mindset leaving the Baghdad Museum wide open for looters.
Yeah, one of the best professors I ever had in college was an expert on Middle Eastern culture, and he had slides on the National Museum in Baghdad that he showed us one time. It's just unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen images online of what that museum was like before the U.S. invasion. And they've made a big deal about, oh, we've recovered some of the artifacts and relics, but it's just a thin, thin shadow of what it once was.
Yeah. It's a shame.
It is.
It's just really unreal.
Okay, anything else?
No, that was all I wanted to know
All right,
about.
thank
Thanks.
you. We're going to let you go and switch over to Clint in Miami. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, to follow up on that Baghdad, Jim Marr came out and said that apparently Iraqi archaeologists uncovered the treasure of a king, and apparently they were in that museum when it got looted.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to call and ask you about, Mike, is what is Bitcoin and what are your thoughts of it? I haven't had it explained to me very well, apparently.
Well, my opinion on Bitcoin is that it's, as a virtual currency, it's not based on any identifiable unit of value. I understand the idea of having a virtual currency to improve commerce, and already the government is screaming about how drug sales from this website called Silk Road are being facilitated by anonymous Bitcoin transfers. It's worth whatever people think it's worth. The reason I stay away from it is because of this process of Bitcoin mining, where you will take your $5,000 desktop computer and have it churning 24 hours a day to get $35 worth of Bitcoins. And it's all about encryption and processing these encrypted blocks. I think it's a covert way of crowdsourcing breaking public encryption keys. Now, for those of you into public key cryptography, the idea is that you will encrypt with a private key, and then you will send out a public key with which the message can then be, or rather, you send out a public key that people will encrypt traffic to you that can only be decoded with your private key. And it's supposed to be very secure for that reason. But the reality is, with enough computer power, you can derive the private key from the public key, and I think that's what this Bitcoin mining has really been doing, because at the same time Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining started becoming popular, we started seeing all of these supposedly secure financial centers coming under successful hack attacks.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Well, that's my concern.
Okay.
That's my concern. Okay.
All righty. Yeah, I see it going quite a bit.
Well, again, we've seen it go up and seen it go down. Apparently, there's now, because there are a couple of different versions of the Bitcoin transaction software out there, there's a problem with one part of the Bitcoin network no longer responding to another part of the Bitcoin network, and they're having to sort that one out. But the reality is, most money on planet Earth is already being sent around electronically. And most money exists only as a computer record. And so in that context, Bitcoin isn't really anything new. It just seems, it's very heavily promoted along with this process of Bitcoin mining, and you have to wonder, what is the value of the Bitcoin mining process to those who are issuing the Bitcoins in exchange for all this computational value? They're not just giving the stuff away. They're getting something of value from all this number crunching that's taking place on computers all across America. I think it's crowdsourced key breaking is what I'm thinking it is.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. All righty. Now, the other day we were talking about how over at the University of Texas, specifically Galveston, there was a vial of a very serious illness, the guanarito virus. It's a hemorrhagic fever. It has an estimated 20% lethality rate, which is pretty serious stuff. There's no vaccine, there's no cure. Apparently this lab had 5 of these vials in a biosafety level 4 facility. And BSL-4s, they are as tight as they come. It's tighter than Fort Knox, really. in terms of what goes in and what goes out, and the people who are working BSL-4 take what they do very seriously because their first mistake could easily be their last one. And supposedly a vial of this virus simply vanished. We are being assured by this laboratory that it was probably accidentally, inadvertently destroyed. And that's a hard one to believe because even the trash in a BSL-4 has to be run through a process of decontamination. They don't just open the door and fling it out back into the trash bin. And apparently, over at Investment Watch blog, they're calling attention to the fact that this university is also home to an individual, a professor, Eric Pianka, who has been a long-time campaigner saying that 90% of the world's population needs to be removed to save planet Earth, to end global warming, blah, blah, blah. I read this story and I flashed back to this Bruce Willis movie, 12 Monkeys. And it's a really great movie if you've never seen it. And it involves time travel and a dystopian future. The story is that Earth is subjected to this horrible plague that wipes out most of the population, drives the survivors underground, and they're sending these volunteers back to try and correct the problem. And it turns out that a scientist in a laboratory dealing with infectious organisms decides the world is overpopulated, and he just walks out with a bottle of the stuff and takes a world tour and sets this thing off. If this Professor Pianka is on prescription antidepressants, we may be in trouble. Back to the phones. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, since I called in, you got on the virus missing, and I just want to, so I'll chip on that, but I have another one as well. That is, remember the anthrax from Fort Detrick?
Yes.
With Philip Zack. I mean,
yes.
That's another one. But the prime thing I want to call up, we were talking about destruction, willful destruction of cultural history. There's absolutely no better example than Israel with the Palestinians. They have destroyed, how many hundreds of villages and sites and so on. It's cultural genocide as well as real genocide.
Well,
but,
and
anyway.
of course Israel's attitude is there's really no such thing as the Palestinians. This was just an empty parking lot when we showed up, and it's one of the biggest of the big lies that we get from Israel. But it's erasing not just the physical people in the buildings, it's erasing their history and identity. And of course the Americans did it to the Native Americans. Again, another cool movie, I think it's on cable right now, is Last of the Dogmen. That's a fun movie to watch. Rather surprising, good film coming out of Carolco. And I really enjoy that one. So, yeah, it's erasing the evidence of the people in order to justify taking over their land.
Well, absolutely. Anyways, that's it for me, Michael. Thank you.
You got it. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit to the comparison between the anthrax that was taken from Fort Detrick and used in the 9/11 anthrax letters and this virus. This, go back here and look at the name again because I forgot it. All right, it's South American virus, the guanarito, that has a 20% mortality rate. I hope nobody is foolish enough to use this virus in a hoax terror attack because of the issue of secondary communicability. I know the corporate media has always told you anthrax, terrorists are going to use anthrax. Well, there's a reason they do that. Anthrax is a battlefield weapon. It has very low secondary communicability. You spray the spores on your opposing army, they all come down sick. But it stops there. You can get anthrax from inhaling the spores. You will not get anthrax from being near or touching somebody that already has it. And so the contagion is contained to the area that is sprayed. It doesn't break out. It doesn't go wild. This guanarito virus has a high degree of secondary communicability. If somebody is going to, like, put it into letters to send out to members of Congress and the media to scare them into a new version of the Patriot Act, the danger is that as they get sick, they will make other people sick around them, and you can't control the contagion. That's the reason the media is always trying to link terrorism and anthrax, because they're getting ready to use anthrax as a staged terror attack, but they know ahead of time it will not spread. Real terrorists wouldn't use anthrax. You need whole kinds of airplanes with spray and dispersal to affect a large population. One little vial of anthrax, you're going to make maybe 2-3 people sick. That's not an act of terror. Real terrorists would use something like guanarito or Ebola, where the targeted population does the work of spreading the infection. And that's the difference between guanarito and anthrax, and I hope they find this vial, and that we don't have somebody out there with their brain fried on antidepressants who thinks they're going to save Mother Earth from all of us icky-poo human beings. Alrighty, let's see. We already talked about that one here. They're targeting farmers with raw milk. Everybody knows that Obama just signed the Monsanto Protection Act. It was actually a spending bill, and they attached a rider to basically allow Monsanto to go on selling GMO seeds and crops, even if they're proven dangerous, even if the courts say they must stop. Monsanto can ignore the courts as long as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is filled with people with connections to Monsanto, says, yeah, it's okay, we've decided it's safe. Perfectly safe here. Apparently the Obama ethics panel, speaking of anthrax, the Obama ethics panel has now given a thumbs up to test anthrax vaccines on American children. Amazing stuff here. There is concern being raised, and again this is over at the Daily Mail, that the practice of dosing livestock with antibiotics as a precaution preventative is what is giving rise to these new drug-resistant superbugs. And they're saying this idea of giving these antibiotics to animals that are healthy is causing more problems than it solves. Speaking of causing more problems than it solves, the output of corn in the United States of America is in sharp decline. They're trying to blame the drought. I think it's the GMO crops, which are less resistant to drought than natural varieties. And the corn supplies are shrinking at the fastest pace in almost 4 decades. A big part of that continues to be the diversion of farmland to produce food into this whole ethanol subsidy. Something like 1/3 of the corn grown in the United States of America is diverted to produce ethanol. Because it's green, it's carbon neutral. It's none of those things. It's not carbon neutral. It is harmful to older car engines. I actually have to go to a special gas station and get ethanol-free gasoline for my 12-year-old Honda, or the fuel system is going to collapse. That's why they started banning ethanol in Germany. It was dissolving the fuel systems on the cars. But by golly, you will get your daily dose of ethanol. Now it was E10, now it's up to E15. Some of the largest automakers are now saying that the warranty that comes with a brand new car does not include damage from E15 fuel. And they're talking like BMW, Mercedes, Ford, all of these top car manufacturers. They're saying up front, this E15 gas is going to destroy the fuel system of the car, and we're not going to pay for it. But it's all about saving the Earth from global warming. This thing has really hit its sell-by date. It is time to let it go and admit it was a gigantic, monstrous lie told to you to trick you out of your money and out of your obedience. And it's time to stand up and yell bovine excrement at it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And obviously we're keeping an eye on the situation in Europe. It looks to be spreading. To recap from the top of the show, they're still trying to figure out a way they can open the banks of Cyprus on Thursday. They're hiring security guards, some of them from outside Cyprus. Some British security guards are going on down there to make sure that people go in politely, accept whatever little amount of money the bankers decide they need for that week, and then they go right back on out peacefully. I don't think that situation's going to hold together. Had 2 banks in Spain collapse. Bankia did, and one of the smaller ones did. They're talking about raiding depositors' accounts in Spain and Italy next. It's going to spread. It's going to spread. So please keep yourselves fully informed. Make good decisions. Do not think for a second the banks or the government are going to take care of you, that they're even thinking about what is best for you. The private central banks exist to make themselves rich on the backs of the working people, and the government is fully in their pocket. That is, of course, fascism. Now, let's see. Interesting little story. As we come up on the Easter weekend and the people who are big fans of the imaginary playmate in the sky are running around with all of their mythologies on full display. And I got an email the other day as part of a long discussion on evolution, making the claim that on his deathbed Charles Darwin recanted his theory of evolution and said, yes, I believe in God the Creator, and he made all of this stuff. And apparently that's been a very common piece of Christian propaganda for quite some time, to the point where Charles Darwin's descendants have had to go public saying it did not happen. The believers in the imaginary playmate just made that up out of thin air. You know, like that story about the talking snake and the apple from the magic tree and all the rest of that stuff. Oh, let's see. By the way, an interesting story broke, since we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the John F. Kennedy assassination. A lot of people have been talking about this photo taken by James Altkins, looking at the presidential motorcade at the moment that John F. Kennedy grabbed his throat. And there's a figure in the doorway of the book depository that looks like Lee Harvey Oswald, even in the same clothes which photos taken after his arrest show him to be wearing. And the supporters of the Warren mythology and the Warren Commission, which included John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, insist that another witness, Billy Lovelady, said that was him standing in the doorway, even though they don't really look alike, and Lovelady said he was wearing this plaid shirt at the time. Evidence has come out that Lovelady identified a different figure in the doorway that was subsequently blacked out by the Warren report. So that whole hoax has fallen apart. There's the music. We're going to head on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, keep yourself fully informed, make good choices. Keep an eye on what's going on in Europe. Sooner or later, it's going to get here. Take care of yourself. Nobody else is going to do it. And aloha, America.